pluralistic media and transparency and research. Next, please. So, this global initiative was launched at the end of our presidency at G20, as was mentioned before, and it's joined by Belgium, Chile, Denmark, Spain, Finland, France, Morocco, United Kingdom, Sweden, Uruguay, and research networks and NGOs, such as the Forum on Information and Democracy, the International Panel on Information Environment, and Climate Action Against Disinformation. So here it's a bunch of actions that already happened in the last year, but I would highlight the declaration launched yesterday that brings the idea of commits the 12 countries that have signed, but also calls for donors, for private sector, for governments to work upon this agenda. Next, please. Some of the strategic pillars that the initiative brings are strengthening research into climate information integrity globally, and it's not by chance that IPCC, WMO, and other institutions around the climate debate are part of the advisory group of the initiative, because of course our work stems and comes from the work that has already been done in the last decades that are around this issue. But of course we have to support evidence-based action and solutions. We're talking about trying to bring to implementation and to create impact, positive impact on the climate agenda. Next, please. So this is basically a view on how we see coalition and cooperation and a multi-stakeholder perception, bringing evidence, bringing investigative journalism, political engagement, strategic communications, public awareness and information and advocacy that can lead to evidence-based insights, transparency and accountability, bolstering independent media, supporting accurate, reliable information, capacity building and training, and go into public awareness and empowerment and greater societal trust and resilience, and of course climate action and future resilience. What means that's absolutely connected to the ACE agenda and to the Glasgow program. Next, please. So, integrating information integrity onto the ACE agenda means recognizing the risks to climate information integrity, considering, of course, information integrity as cross-cutting across the 6 ACE elements, but I would reinforce that we should consider a specific approach to public awareness and public access to information. What means not only bringing the positive approach, but also how to deal with the obstacles of the attacks that for financial or political reasons the climate action suffers. Finally, we would like to reinforce the need for encouraging parties to support and develop strategies to strengthen information integrity on climate change and reinforce research on the threats to climate information integrity. Next. That's it. I think that's the introduction that I would like to bring. Thank you very much for your time, and we hope to continue discussing that until the review of the Glasgow program next year.
Thank you, João and Charlotte. We understand this integrity of information in this global mutirão is really important to face the misinformation and also save lives in this context of climate crisis. So the integrity of information is one of the most important things we have here in our hands to advance now to protect the future, but have to be in the present. So thank you for all the efforts. We will now pass for our panel, and maybe we can start with Juanita. Can be? Juanita, the question we have for you is, why do you think there is a growing crisis of trust in the climate information ecosystem, and how does this affect people's ability to take meaningful climate action? You have 2 minutes. The floor is yours. Thank you for coming.
Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you so much for having me here. It was clearly not the optimal day to lose my voice, so sorry, I'm going to do my best. I believe there's a growing crisis of trust in climate information ecosystem because people are increasingly caught between too much noise and too little credibility. So studies show that more than 40% of the world population has been exposed to some kind of climate disinformation online. And combined with the fact that trust in traditional news outlets has fallen below 50%, we are clearly in deep, deep trouble. I've been working in the climate space for almost a decade now, and I'm always very vocal in my social media, so I've realized this year is the year where I've gotten the worst kind of conspiracy theory comments on my Instagram, so I will share some of my favorites just so you get the idea of what's out there. Climate change is the world's largest scam. This is just propaganda to make countries poorer. And my personal favorite, glaciers are growing and not shrinking. So that's the kind of things we see on social media every day. Why is this? Over the past decade, climate science has moved from scientific circles to social media feeds. And in social media feeds, the algorithm rewards outrage, simplicity, and emotional reaction so much more than it rewards actual accuracy. This has created a fragmented landscape in which misinformation and politicization thrive. When climate narratives are co-opted by partisan agendas, many people stop trusting who is saying something even before they understand what that person is actually saying. So the erosion of trust directly undermines people's ability to take meaningful decisions and meaningful climate action. When the public can distinguish between fact, spin, and manipulation, what follows is paralysis, because we don't know what to do, we don't know what is actually real. People feel that nothing is certain, institutions appear self-interested, and collective action becomes harder to mobilize. So rebuilding trust means recentering communication on transparency, local relevance, and moral honesty. Moving from these abstract data points that we see everywhere to stories that actually show tangible solutions, lived experiences, and shared common values. Stories that make people feel like they belong in the solutions and not that they're being constantly lectured by someone online. Only then, I believe that information can actually become empowerment instead of just noise.
Perfect. Thank you, Juanita. I will move the floor for James. James, based on your work with journalists worldwide, is our collective challenge in this area related to access to or the lack of accurate and reliable climate information? What are you seeing on the ground? Can you tell for us, please? 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcele. It's nice to be here. For those not familiar, the Earth Journalism Network, we are a global community of over 34,000 journalists around the world dedicated to improving coverage of climate change and the environment. Last year, we carried out a survey of over 800 climate journalists, the largest such survey ever carried out as far as we know, to try and determine what is happening on the ground. First of all, the good news. 77% of journalists say that climate coverage has increased over time, and 82% of journalists say that their climate stories have more prominence now than 10 years ago. 72% of journalists say they are able to cover both problems and solutions. This is really important, to cover solutions to give people a feeling of hope as well as understanding the challenges of climate change. And we have documented so many impacts on public policies, on regulations, on debate as a result of good climate journalism. We've seen how low carbon development has been, policies have been boosted in places like India and Vietnam. In India and Fiji, we documented how villagers that were threatened by sea level rise were resettled as a result of good coverage. In Uganda and Vietnam, we documented how sand mining was causing erosion, and that was also banned in several key areas. But now the bad news. Journalists say that even though climate coverage has improved, it does not match what is needed. I think that is obvious. 35% of journalists say they have been threatened for their climate coverage, threatened financially, physically, legally, and a similar number, over a third of journalists say that they have to practice self-censorship. They have to restrict what they report because of these threats. 62% of journalists, a majority, still feel pressured to include sources who are skeptical of climate change. This is a phenomenon we call false balance, and it's improved over time. A lot of countries now you don't see that so much, but in many places it's still a problem. And of course, most of all, journalists say they're seeing a massive rise in mis and disinformation. 93% say the overwhelming source of this mis and disinformation is social media. But there are things we can do to help address that, and I hope to talk more about that in the future, but I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Can we make a round of claps for our speakers, please? I will move the floor for Rich. Rich, how is the public debate currently representing the desire of a vast majority of people in terms of their support of ambitious climate action? And also share with us the global citizen experience, because it's important for this global multi-round we are making. So the floor is yours, 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Marceli. Look, I mean, I think we all know, don't we, that we are in uncharted territory, right? I mean, we all know the stat of 89% of people who want ambitious climate action. When I started my career, I was working as a climate advisor in the UK government in the year 2000. And in those days, the level of support for climate action was often going between like 45% and 52%. In the UK, it's recently dropped from about 72% to 66%. That's called a decisive majority. And whether it's in Brazil, it's 68%. In the US, I mean, so in the US, it's currently 66% of people support more ambitious climate action. I mean, these are what you call decisive majorities of support. However, the politics doesn't reflect that, and this is clearly an enormous problem. And I think a lot of what we've heard about already from the collapse of journalism and fake news, etc., is really kind of feeding into that situation. But one of the areas of hope, I think, is that there's also 89% of the population want to see stronger misinformation laws. And we have this very interesting situation, which for me is the first time in my career, whereby politicians who historically more or less wanted to follow public debate because they thought that's where the votes lied, there seems to be a political illiteracy emerging into the system, and that's why it's vital we think about these things in terms of these kind of ecosystems. Now, one of the reasons we're here at COP30 is supporting this Global Citizens Assembly that Marcelo has been a great supporter, as well as the Brazilian government. And part of the reason that's so important as a kind of legacy of COP30 is we know that this vast movement of public participation processes are brilliant at dealing with the issue of misinformation, because the real challenge comes into place when you go from the top level, I want to see climate action, but actually in my community, what's going to happen on the ground? And people have concerns about new infrastructure, but this isn't a climate concern. This is just a development concern, whether people are going to have a new Amazon warehouse next to their house, a new road. So fundamentally what we need to have in place is new governance infrastructure and a global mutual to be able to support the conversations of how we move to implementation. And that's why I'm working with ACE and Marcelo and others across the COP30 team. It's so heartening to see people recognizing that we have to shift towards implementation, but to do so, we need new governance infrastructure, which is really anchored in communities to do that.
Thank you, Rich. We are understanding the challenge, so I will move the floor to Lucy to make the last question in your panel. Lucy, please.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Marcelo, and thank you. And a round of applause again for the speakers so far. That's great. Our final question in this challenges section is for Maciel Caro. And Maciel is an ace negotiator, Dominican Republic. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming. My question for you is, in terms of challenges, what challenges do countries face at the national level in creating the conditions to enable informed and empowered public engagement in climate policy and action? 2 minutes, please.
Thank you. Thank you. That is an excellent question, Lucy. I know this is not necessarily protocol, but I do want to take the opportunity to highlight the effort that the presidency has made in coming up with this event and putting together the Initiative of Information Integrity. Coming from a developing country, it is for us highly essential that we are able to access information that is not only science-based, but that also has data that the public is able to access. Some of the main ideas that come to mind when thinking about the challenges is, and seeing the broad range of speakers that we have today, I would like to start from the current date to the past. So right now we have a lot of different ways in which the public will use the information and different platforms that people use the information. So when you have a developing country that has part of the country that doesn't have access to internet and doesn't use social media in the same way that other countries are able to access the social media platforms, or that we have frequent power outages, so you can't really rely on the most modern ways that people access to information. We have to heavily rely on the traditional ways that people access the information, such as printed press and sometimes the radio. One of the most ironic things that we found in 2022 when we had a climate change perception, knowledge and practice survey was that a large part of the population didn't rely on the government information. However, they relied more in the priest from the church based on the information that they could provide on climate rather than in the government itself. So the institutional arrangements need to be strong, need to be collaborative, and need to be inclusive to tackle that challenge. Secondly, the budgetary constraints that often institutions have in order for them to shape, design, and implement effective communication strategies that address climate change is a very big challenge. But also, and someone had already mentioned this, the climate story. So the storytelling has been evolving, and it's important for governments to identify what it is the correct language that they need to use to reach a certain population. So we have a lot of diversity in the Dominican Republic, and oftentimes you can't really speak to people in the north of the island the same way that you speak to people in the east of the island who is heavily dependent on tourism, for example. And then the way that you speak to someone whose main income structure is agriculture is not going to be the same way that you speak to someone that, you know, depends on tourism or that works for the industry. So we have launched a different map roads over the years that tackle different economic aspects that we have. For example, the Ministry of Industry and Commerce, alongside to the Ministry of Environment, they launched a roadmap to tackle the consumption of plastic, because we had a law. This is an example. We had a law that was passed back in like 2020, but it hadn't been able to come into full effect. And a lot of that had to do with the way that we are able to communicate with the population to get them to understand and be on board and create that type of behavioral change. So those are some of the key challenges that we have. And one of the ways that the Dominican Republic is trying to tackle those aspects is actively engaging in the process of policy making. So for example, the NDC in the Dominican Republic is a completely participatory process, and we have participation from civil society, from academia, from the private sector, as well as the public sector. And we have thematic tables. So each already prioritized and identified sector that is going to contribute with information to the NDC is invited. And also at the international level, our delegation is multidisciplinary. A lot of delegations have colleagues from Ministry of Environment or from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The Dominican Republic has delegates from the Ministry of Industry and Commerce, has delegates from the National Office of Information, which is the leader to gather and process effective data. And we also have people alongside from the National Council of Climate Change. We have people from the Ministry of Agriculture. We have people from academia. And that way we can adequately identify how we can bring the information back to the country and make it accessible to those different sectors.
Yeah, thank you so much for that intervention. And I think I feel the same way as you feel about the ACE agenda as about the effort that was put into IPCC Annual Report 6, which for the first time really called out not just the problems of information integrity, but the need to develop narratives, public storytelling, to have a focus on behavioural interventions. And so I think this is now a great moment to, with Marceli as well, to open up the second round of discussions. We've spoken about the challenges. We're now moving to the solutions. And Marcel, I'm going to pass back to you again, noting that in your earlier comment on challenges, I noticed you already, as clearly a born storyteller, moved to the solutions. And I think that's great. And the final piece I would love to bring in is storytelling really works. We're actually 22 times more likely to remember a story than a fact. It's incredible, 22 times more likely. So to open up the solutions part of this discussion, Marcel, I'll pass back to you and ask, how are ACE and information integrity connected, and how can they reinforce each other to ensure individuals and societies are equipped to support just and equitable climate transitions?
Well, they are definitely interlinked. I see information integrity as not necessarily inserted in ACE, but as a key element that it is optimal and essential to be discussed during the conversations of ACE. Because when we look at the ACE elements, we can discuss education all we want, but if we don't have teachers that have the right materials for them to actually implement the education materials in the classroom, then we aren't really doing anything just by talking about climate change. So some of the things that we can do to tackle and to close that gap, in the Dominican Republic we have a dedicated fund for research. This is led by the Ministry of Superior Education. It's called Fondo CIT, and it covers a wide range of different subjects that are picked up every year. And the research is funded by the government so that there can be a superior level research on those subjects. And then one of the things I was saying about the storytelling, for example, the National Council for Climate Change had an initiative through social media, which was called the Climate Little School, in Spanish, Escuelita Climática. And so what it did is that we had the head of communications. He would often interview different relevant stakeholders that relate to the climate change policy-making aspect, and then he would create some very short educational videos that address key aspects. So we would upload that to a platform, and that would be easier for people to reach because, as we've been saying, storytelling matters. And another thing that the Dominican Republic has is that whenever there is a climate change project that is approved, we make sure that it has one specific dedicated line addressed to education or to raising awareness. However, when we speak about raising awareness, it's important to note that we have found with our surveys that awareness does not necessarily equate the impact that we expect it to have. So to go further on that, we try to work very closely with the territories, and we try to work very closely with the different institutions in the public sector. So every year we will go to different institutions and we will have sensitization at a medium and decision-making level, so that they are adequately engaged and that they understand that the work that we do at a local and international level will eventually yield fruitful results for a country.
Round of applause, please, for Marcel. Thank you. I will now pass the floor back to Marceli.
Thank you. Marcial, I want to be your friend and talk about this all the afternoon. I will give the floor again for Rich, and we talk a little bit about Global Citizens Assembly, but coming back about this proposal of solution, what is and how this participatory model can make citizens' voice a lasting safeguard for information integrity. Please, Rich.
Thanks, Marceli, and I'll try and be closer to the mic this time. Lucy, I was just thinking about your 22 times storytelling point, which I've heard, and it's true, isn't it? And I don't think we've got the data on what happens in participatory processes, but you see obviously similar things happening whereby you've got representative groups of people talking about issues they care a lot about. And I think what happens is there's this mixture of storytelling, personal testimony, and of course the people who are sharing their versions of evidence, which might be fake news or might not, let's face it. But under those conditions, you've got a mixed media of, information, interpretation, and engagement, which just allows the diversity of learning methods to kind of come to the fore. What the Global Citizens Assembly it will be launched next Thursday, initiated the post-COP30 process. It consists of two components: a civic assembly, which is demographically representative of the global population, and it will be running in the first half of 2026, looking at the issue of kind of food systems. With the sortition has already happened, which has dropped 100 dots around the world, and at each location, a community-based organisation is identified to ensure you've got a sample which is an accurate reflection of the global population. But the big power, where we get the real power, is the community assemblies, and there are 7,500 formal participatory processes taking place across the world right now that we know about, but we estimate that there's hundreds of thousands out there. And so by COP31, we will have had 5,000 community assemblies run, so there'll be hundreds of thousands of people participating. And by the global stocktake in 2028, we hope to get 1 million involved. That's an ambitious goal. So hopefully, together, if people are inspired by this, they can get involved part of that process. But fundamentally, what we're seeking to do here is create this infrastructure of what you might call a shadow governance regime that already exists. And I can see Estasia sitting on the front row. She's done incredible work looking at climate assemblies with indigenous communities and climate protectors. There's a vast movement of people out there running these new governance regimes, and the Global Citizens Assembly is about creating a network to bring those in to climate diplomacy. And so just as in Paris, through the action agenda, we brought in cities, civil society and businesses. Following COP30, we can bring in people to the future of climate diplomacy.
Thank you, Rich. I will move for Juanita. How can climate education and literacy give people the tools to recognize disinformation and strengthen resilience to misinformation? And like a young person, the climate education for us is really important. So the integrity information, climate education are really close or not? I think yes, but the floor is yours, please.
Thank you so much for this question. And it hits really close to home. I'm from Chile, and we have presidential elections this weekend. And we have seen how my country is following the footsteps of other countries where misinformation has been used to manipulate elections. I want to talk about the solutions because we've seen in Chile that some candidates have been using these tactics, bots, fake news, etc., to get ahead in the presidential race. And what I have found personally to be a very, very useful solution are fact checkers. So if anyone is a fact checker here and is taking that really, really important job, I thank you very deeply. But I want to talk about other solutions, and I want to push back on what was said a little bit before, because climate education and literacy can be one of the most powerful tools we have to counter disinformation. Yes, I agree, and the UN and this presidency has been doing an amazing job on that, but I think this is only if we expand what we mean by education. So for too long, I believe that climate has been focused on the science itself, so emissions, temperature rise, impacts, measurement, which is, of course, don't get me wrong, absolutely fundamental and important, but it's not enough. It's not enough if we're not teaching how to navigate the information ecosystem itself, the information ecosystem around all this data. Studies show that communities with stronger climate literacy are up to 30% more resilient to conspiracy theories, and that's because education doesn't just transfer facts, it builds cognitive resilience. One particular effective approach is what psychologists call the inoculation theory. So just like we do with vaccines, where we're exposed to a weakened version of a virus, the inoculation theory exposes us to a weakened piece of misinformation and then explains us why it is misleading, so we can then go out in the world, and when we encounter these kinds of headlines or misleading news, etc., we're able to identify and reject them. This means that climate literacy shouldn't only be about emissions targets, policy agreements, which, again, don't get me wrong, is absolutely the priority here. But it should also be about how we teach information, how information is shared, how it spreads, who benefits from distortion, and how emotions are used to manipulate it. When people understand both the science and the storytelling behind climate, they can stay open-minded without being naive. So I 100% agree on the importance of storytelling. But ultimately, climate literacy is civic literacy. It gives citizens the tools to think critically, to question without falling into cynicism, and to rebuild trust through understanding. In that sense, every newsroom, every campaign, every organization here has a role to play in strengthening our collective immunity to misinformation. So I think those are the solutions, and that's where efforts should be focused on this agenda.
Thank you, Anita. I will move the floor to James, and understanding we are in one COP with culture included in the agenda, we understand the communication is really important for all us to mobilize and to engage in. So what kinds of support or partnerships from philanthropy, government, private sector, everyone in the spirit of Mutirão are most needed right now to sustain independent, fact-based and engaging climate communication? Also, how can journalists and social media creators work together with governments, can raise public awareness effectively? The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcele. So what can we do to improve the situation on the ground? Well, talking about partnerships, a great example is the Climate Change Media Partnership, which is a collaboration between Internews' Earth Journalism Network and the Stanley Center for Peace and Security. This CCMP has been bringing journalists from the Global South to the climate COPs for the last 18 years. We've altogether brought hundreds of journalists here to cover the summits, producing thousands of stories. And as Lucy said, that's really what it's about. It's telling stories. And these journalists do a wonderful job at it. That is their profession. There are certainly many other good partnerships out there. There's you may be familiar with the Climate Action Against Disinformation Network, a group of 120 organizations working for climate information integrity. What are the kinds of things we can do at the Earth Journalism Network? We provide training workshops, we provide grants for story, we support local media, we do a lot of investigative reporting. We've produced special reports on greenwashing and how companies tout climate benefits that aren't really there. We just recently came out with a special report on how the building out of AI data centers and cryptocurrency mining operations are causing huge climate and environmental impacts. And there's so much more, but let me just make 3 key points here. First of all, we really need to support local media, okay? This is the media that is hurting the most. There are a lot of very strong multinational media out there that are doing well and doing great reporting. But it's really at the local level where the media is hurting, where the traditional business model has collapsed, and where we're seeing news deserts. And that's especially true about climate change. And it's the local media that we found that creates the most impacts because they tell the stories in local languages and they know the situation on the ground. The second point, this requires investment. We are used to thinking that the media can support itself, but in many places that is just no longer the case. Again, the traditional business models collapsed, and when it comes to, especially when it comes to climate change and the environment, we're just not seeing enough stories out there. So we don't just need private investment. Frankly, we need the public sector to support climate communications and media, and we need philanthropy to step in if we want the kind of climate coverage that this world needs. And finally, we need to work more with social media content creators, so-called influencers. That's where a lot of audiences are going to, and they can be really important communicators about the climate crisis. What we're doing at the Earth Journalism Network is bringing together traditional journalists with social media content creators so they can learn from each other. Influencers can learn how to access good information and explain it accurately. Journalists can learn how to tell their stories in a more compelling way using short-form video and social media platforms to get climate information out. We call this program Earth Shorts, and we think it's a great model to help counter climate disinformation and boost climate information integrity. Thank you.
Thank you, James. We earned a lot of important information here in this panel with a lot of challenges, but also a lot of solutions. And this is also something important to highlight in this COP30 inside Amazonia, when we are here for the best climate decisions. So look for the solutions coming from the ground is really important to us, and integrity of information is one solution coming also from the ground. So I want to moving back for João Brand and Charlotte to provide some final remarks to us in this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcel. It's been great to hear from all of you, Richard, Marcel, Juanita, James. I think we're quite not only aligned in the way we see, but also the way we think we should move forward. And it's good to understand that actually the fight for defending, promoting information integrity is, of course, already happening in place. We know that. It's been decades of work of climate activists and organizations on that, but we can bring that to attention of negotiators and of other players involved in terms of the need to deal not only with the natural or positive obligations that come from the ACE program, but also to deal with the obstacles that other players are doing to these to become reality on the ground. So I'm glad to see that and to see how close we are in terms of what has to be in the diagnosis, but also in what has to be done. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yeah, I'd like to reinforce what Raj just said about how inspiring it is actually to hear all of these amazing solutions on the panel today, but also throughout this week. I mean, there have been so many information integrity related events happening here in Belém already. And, you know, around the world, we're seeing really incredible examples of tireless efforts to strengthen the information ecosystem for climate action. And I think, you know, that is what gives me hope in this work. What we need to do is try and kind of scale up and scale out some of those community level efforts, you know, right up to some of the global efforts that we're doing through our global initiative. And as Zhao said, I think increasing awareness and recognition that information integrity is fundamental for effective climate action is key. So I think that's, that's incumbent upon us to continue to make that case and to bring the evidence base and talk about what effective solutions look like. But we really appreciate the opportunity to talk here today. And as I said, it's very inspiring to hear from all of you doing this great work. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. We are finalizing this panel, but I just want to highlight inside my journey to be Presidency of Climate Champion. And when I was just climate activist in Realengo, my neighborhood, one of the first things I started to learn and study about was about the ACE Hub program and efforts about communication and climate education and how this is important for the youth around the world. So it's my absolutely honor to be here with you in this moderation. We are finalizing this panel, so thank you, and a round of claps again for all our panelists, please. And I will give the floor to Lucy to conduct the next part of our meeting here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marcele. It's been such a delight to co-moderate with you. Panelists, thank you. Yes, you may exit the panel now. Thank you. There's always that moment of, do I go? Yes, now is the time. Marcele, I think you're also going to be leaving us for an hour or so while we do the World Cafe and we break you all into groups. But Marcele, we hope you'll be able to join us back for some closing remarks for the final piece. So thank you, Marcele.
I hope so.
Yeah, thank you, Marcele. Thank you, everyone. Oh, thank you so much. Such delight. All right. So I feel we have lifted the energy. As Marcele said, we were at the post-lunch panel, and the wonderful panelists and my co-moderator, Marcele, have really lifted up all the energy. And now we're going to keep it going with some breaking out into groups, and we're going to have an opportunity for everyone to share their own experiences, and collectively we're going to explore this ACE toolbox, the Action for Climate Empowerment toolbox. We've heard so many wonderful stories and interventions about how it's applied in various formats, countries, regions, on different issues. We're going to be looking at climate planning, policies, measures, and how that can strengthen information integrity, foster public engagement, and accelerate effective and inclusive climate action. Now, how we're going to do that is with a World Cafe format. And what you can see on the screen now are the 4 topics that we will explore in the World Cafe format. And we have 4 stations. Now, Laura, remind me, is it 1, 2, 3, and 4? Great, thank you so much. So in this corner here, we will have Station 1, which is empowering citizens through climate literacy, with some fantastic facilitators. Thank you so much for joining us. Christine Usden, Global Director, Climate Education, Cambridge University Press and Assessment, and Isaitis Cintron Rodriguez, Columbia University and ACE Observatory. So that's, we'll stay for a moment, I'll introduce, and then we're going to be moving Group 1 into this corner here. Station 2 at the back will focus on enhancing the accessibility, reliability and effectiveness of information on climate change. Again, wonderful facilitators, Hanna Lapalainen, docent, Pan-Eurasian Experiment Programme, Secretary General, University of Helsinki, and Sadatu Gambo Madak, National ACE Focal Points, Nigeria. So that'll be in this corner here. Station 3 over here will focus on mobilizing children and youth for climate leadership. Facilitators, thank you again, JP Amaral, Head of Nature, Alana, and Ayush Dwivedi Youngo. So thank you so much, that'll be here. And lastly, in this corner at the back here, Station 4 will focus on pathways for effective ACE implementation And our facilitators are Asif Nawaz Shah, Global Covenant of Mayors, and Azul Schwarzman, World Benchmarking Alliance. Okay, so I will allow the groups to introduce the exercise, but you're going to have a short introduction and then you're going to participate in a group discussion, and you'll then swap. Because as it's World Cafe, you get to do you get to do 2 rounds. So you can pick 2 of these 4 topics, and the stations will remain set, and you can move yourself between them. So if you find yourself at a station where there's, you know, a huge amount of people, you might want to move yourself around because you have an opportunity to do that station in a second round. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. I am sorry to say interpretation is not available during the group discussions. And those joining us online, there's a QR code on screen, and you may provide your input that way if you wish to. So I wish you all a wonderful discussion. You can stand up, have a little shake, big breathe, and move yourselves into your stations. And it might be slightly less than 30 minutes, but we will call you when it's time to move around. Thank you so much. Hello, moderators. This is your 5-minute warning, but if you're thinking, hang on, we've only just got started, we could really do with a little bit more time, just raise your hand. Okay, so we could probably do another, okay, noted. We'll make the second round slightly shorter, so we'll go for about another almost 10 minutes now, and then we'll make the second round a little bit shorter. So I'll give you a call when it's time to start moving round. Thank you, keep going. Okay, moderators, it's time to wrap up this first round. I know we could all spend hours more discussing, and obviously after the event we are also free to do so. So if you can now, as delegates, as groups, start moving to your second station. As a reminder, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Let me just, oh, hang on one moment. Let me just read you again which they are. So 1 here is climate literacy. 2 here is information, accessibility of information. 3 in this corner is children and youth. And 4 in this corner is effective implementation. And moderators, if you can please, I would suggest starting your second round with a short summary of what was discussed with the first group, so the second round can build on that. And you have 25 minutes, and then I will call you back. Thank you so much. Hi, moderators. We have about another 7 minutes to go, and then we'll be reporting back. So if you could be ready to share your report back in an under 3-minute format. I'll remind you of that in a moment. But about 7 minutes to go. Thanks, everyone. All right, time to come back. I can see that the conversations would love to keep going, and again, we can keep going after the session. Now, don't go anywhere as we're doing a report back, because we're going to do an ACE family photo. So please don't go anywhere as we're doing the report back from the groups, because it is tradition every year at the ACE event to do a photo here by our hashtag. So we'll be inviting everyone up to do the family photo. But if I now could invite our moderators from our different stations to report back. And if I could remind our moderators to keep the report back under 3 minutes. We're going to keep it quite snappy. And we have had note takers in each of the sessions, so everything that has been discussed will be entered into the record. So you can keep your feedback to very much the highlights. And if there's anything that you would, as a participant, like to make sure that gets shared, there's also the QR codes here on the screen, and you can use that to share general reflections, insights, opportunities for collaboration and action. Yeah. Yes, no problem. So we'll give you a few minutes now to retake your seats and for the moderators to prepare their feedback. About 3 to 5 minutes now. So just have a nice relax. Laura, will we get back? Okay, so let's start our feedback. And Station 1, Christine and Isatis, please forgive me if I'm mispronouncing your names. Please introduce yourselves. And if I can invite you to use the microphones in front of you, and then we can all hear you. So over to you. And as I say, just your highlights under 3 minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Isatis here. We were talking about how to empower through climate literacy. And we were talking about what are the actors and what are the partnerships that are needed. And we saw, we kept mentioning actors, and we came to this point that was like everyone. So there's no single entry point to combat climate misinformation. And the reason for that is that we have different trusted messengers that will speak to different audiences in order for them to trust the information that is being given to them and create that resilience. We also saw that they're important to include critical thinking in the way, so it's not only about information itself, like information about climate itself, but how do we create like digital literacy so that people can understand when they're seeing fake news, on when they're giving misinformation. And also very important to recognize that there are diverse ways of knowing, and that goes into the trusted messengers, and to include traditional knowledge, environmental defenders, indigenous people in the way that we're like claiming experts. And we saw some examples. For example, we saw that Ghana has a group of trained journalists, and when they put out information, they are trusted. So that's like a trusted source. We also heard about shifting how we do education to place-based, because people have, like when you have a lived experience, it's harder to dismantle that and for them to say like, oh, like that's not real when you lived it. And finally, talking about what is transdisciplinarity and breaking silos within the educational system and bringing them all together. So I don't know if you want to add anything.
Thank you, Isatis. Just two things to build on that. We talked about the importance of empowering teachers. Just in Brazil alone, there are 1.7 million teachers. Just think if we can really harness the effectiveness and the confidence of teachers to help us support climate action and empowerment. And the second point was around partnerships and really building diverse partnerships to train, to build capability, and to build courage to respond to mis and disinformation. Thank you.
Oh, let's have not just a round of applause, but a woo, woo, woo for Group 1. It sounded like such a fantastic conversation. Yeah, high fives. And a brilliant feedback. You kept to the 3 minutes as well, so thank you, facilitators. Wonderful. Okay, now on to Station 2. We have Hannah and Sadatu. Again, please forgive me if I'm mispronouncing your names. Please reintroduce yourselves. And can we hear your under 3 minute summary of your groups, your station's discussions?
All right, thank you so much. And I am Sadatu, so you produce the name perfectly well. And so our session actually look at enhancing the accessibility, reliability, and effectiveness of information on climate change. And we have a variety of audience ranging from media, research institute, government, block representative, digital sectors. We're all present there. And the discussion rallies around some guiding questions. And what we have is that to be able to have a reliable and accessible information, you need to make someone trust your information. Though it's difficult to fact check information, but you need to identify the narratives, and which is tailored to country circumstances. And the group also the view that to start this strategy, you need to also kickstart that with the young people. You need to also be able to be coordinated and to honor the local community leadership. Also, reliable information should be produced by the government, and that is the information that is very key. And then we should be able to have the government funding the content producers. That way, we should be able to have accessible information and then reliable information as well. And then we should ensure accuracy in the translations, just to make sure we avoid misinformation. So the language is very key here, and the language is also very, very typical alongside with key examples. That way you'll be able to also reach out to the community themselves. Also, the strategy, partnership, and libraries should be able to be localized. So that way, there should be a kind of relationship between the government, the media, the activists, and that way information can be coordinated and can be reliably communicated. So I will give the floor to my colleague Anna to add up some few points.
Just to add that we have in our group discussions several countries representing Global South, Global North, every continent, and just keeping in mind also the big context that the problems in Global South are very different from Global North, and in Global South there is no data access at all. And in Global North there is plenty of data, and the questions of disinformation are much more relevant. And also that putting in the context global change versus other global challenges than poverty, that's very important in the point of communication.
Okay, another round of applause and woo, woo, woo! Again, such a rich conversation clearly was had, and I don't know about you, but I'm really feeling the sense of the expertise and knowledge and experience in this room is something really impressive. So it's starting to feel the end of the event feels to me like it's building to its most important conclusion. So thank you, moderators, and again, you kept to your 3 minutes, so thank you so much. Station 3, JP and Ayush, if you would please give us your highlights and summary, we would love to hear from you.
Thank you, Co-Chair. So from the Station 3, Mobilizing Children and Youth for the Climate Leadership, we have received insightful inputs. So in order to summarize, so disinformation and misinformation affect the children and youth by making it difficult to distinguish the truth from the falsehood, especially with the rise of the AI and the social media misinformation. So this confusion undermines their ability to engage meaningfully in issues like the climate change, fueling climate anxiety, and leaving them without the clear tools for their actions. So by ensuring the information integrity with the accurate, accessible, and trustworthy information is therefore essential for the protecting young people's right to participate in the democratic and policy process. So solutions include by empowering the teachers and the parents to guide critical thinking, develop exchange programs, and integrating the organized youth group into the policy-making process. So regarding the climate leadership of children and youth, so children need education that builds future-oriented, community-based climate thinking and ensure there is a safe participation, which is very important as defender of nature. Youth and children must be given child-friendly access to the COPs and to other decision-making spaces with the participatory and the age-appropriate methodologies. So I'll hand over to the JP now.
Thanks, Ayush. So we also discussed in regards to the role of the ACE toolbox to foster this climate leadership by children and youth. We talked about that this toolbox gives the baseline and vocabulary, for example, to start and to inform, to give access to information, but also educate. The role of training is one of the elements of the toolbox in regards to technical terms and how to really reach a broader content in this regard. Public awareness is a really relevant key for passing values and ethical issues, also bringing awareness to new people to come to the community of climate activists, for example. We talked about the role of education as growing abilities as well, and to enhance community engagement to find climate solutions. And finally, we talked about some good practices and intergenerational cooperation. I'll mention some of the examples that are really interested that were mentioned here. We had from Peru the COP de las Infancias, the COP from children, which was a children role play COP negotiations through art and games. We saw the cards here and they were quite nice. From Indonesia, it was mentioned also the elders using singing and cultural traditions to transmit this indigenous ecological knowledge to children. From Australia, also hosting intergenerational learning spaces and dialogues with elders. And Yungo as well, creating an intergenerational advisory board, as well as the experience of the COI that for the first time had a really amazing children delegation there, and also the inclusion in the Global Youth Statement. So these practices illustrate how culture, creativity, education, collaboration can unite generations to strengthen the children and youth leadership towards climate change. Thank you.
Wonderful. Round of applause and woo, 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 for Group 3, Station 3. And it's really noticeable that there are some themes emerging across all of these stations, which is great to hear. And your microphone is still on. Moderators? JP, your microphone is still on. Yeah, no, don't worry. Great to hear the similar themes and the wonderful examples that we're hearing in each station. So finally on to Station 4, and this is Asif and Azul. If you could give us your under 3-minute highlights of the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. My co-facilitator left me, so it'll be short, I promise. So here in Station 4, we were discussing challenges in building resilient, trustworthy climate information ecosystems that can support climate action. Then we were speaking about tools and resources that are needed to address those challenges. And then at the end, we were speaking about how multi-level and multi-stakeholder partnerships can help close the existing gaps for effective ACE implementation. So on the challenges, and I think this is where all of the groups dwelled a lot in, we identified first and foremost budget constraints, and this is especially relevant for small island developing states. Then also this growing distrust in government, which gives a rise to the fake news movement. There was a very clear highlight that both non-state actors and state actors are promoting disinformation. And then we found this like two sides of the coins depending on where in the world you were at, because some countries face information overload, meaning there's information coming from everywhere and it's not trustworthy and people don't have the tools to understand what's coming to them. But then in other settings, you don't have quality information or quality channels for information to be delivered. There was also some conversation about not just educating children and youth in climate, but also educating them on identifying trustworthy information and them understanding where the information is coming from. There was also some highlights about being up against the financial system that is advancing this information. So they are very resourced and they have, the economical means to do that. And then
Yes, there was also a lot of conversation around translating climate information into the local context, so communities can get buy-in and really appropriate that information. And so onto tools and resources, there was a very interesting conversation about balancing climate science with trusted messengers, making context-specific information using art to address disinformation. There was also a lot of conversation about building legal frameworks to regulate, for example, tech companies and also the information ecosystem. There were a lot of colleagues from the Climate Action Against Disinformation Coalition, and they have a lot of resources available against disinformation on their website. There was also a mention to open source technology, and then for wrap-up, on the question of multi-level partnerships, there was a highlighting this need to democratize climate knowledge and ancestral knowledge as well. There was a very good point on how climate disinformation peaks during 3 moments, which are extreme weather events, policy events on climate and national elections, so there's a need to anticipate to that as well. And then there was a clear ask for a new institutional arrangement to counter on big tech influence, and then using multi-level partnerships as a way to deploy these informational tools and resources to the communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Round of applause. Woo! In fact, that was a bit weak. Whoa, 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 we'll say. I don't think I could possibly nod anymore in agreement with all of the feedback from the moderators. And again, it covered so much in those 2 stations. There is so much for the ACE team to work with here from the different groups. So I would love to give a very warm thank you to the moderators, but to everyone who has given their time and expertise to move the ACE agenda forward. Now we're going to wrap up, and I will go very briefly through some closing reflections, and also flag that I think on the next, I think on the next screen there is a QR code that you can, yeah, here, thank you. You can scan that if you want to give any feedback. There's a short survey there, so participants, all of you here online and at home or watching from around the world can give any feedback. What's really come through to me today is that the ACE toolbox it's really good. It really ticks off the different levers we need to activate in order to empower the public to tackle information integrity and to excite and inspire people around the climate story. So, and the interventions we've had from our panelists really showed how this comes to life in very different ways, from strengthening democracy to news journalism to social media to negotiating on ACE in country. A huge a flowering of initiatives that we can use to educate and inspire and actually bring in the public to help us on climate action. I don't think there's any one or single right way. We need all of these in our toolbox in order to reach the Paris Agreement. The expertise in the room is staggering. This has been one of the most inspiring for me events that I've been in. The feedback from the groups was so brilliant. So many different case studies that we can all learn from all the different negotiating countries. And my final thought is, you can really feel the love for the ACE agenda. So I would love to invite you, thanking all of the speakers and facilitators, thanking the ACE team who do so much with so little. Thank you so much for bringing us all together on this most important enabling topic. I really want to thank all of you for actively engaging and again bringing your expertise and case studies, the technicians, the interpreters and all the other support staff who we can't do this without you. So can we just have a last round of applause for everyone that put this event together. And now the highlight If you want to come up here, by our hashtags, we will have our annual family photo. We have our photographer here. Thank you so much. Woo! Starting to lose my voice a little bit too. Whoa, whoa, whoa. And we'll come up here for our family photo. Thank you all so much.